I'm in South Bend, Indiana, in the Midwest. I'm doing a doctorate in theology in the University of Notre Dame. So it's great to share a little bit of my theology studies with you all. Um, so Barbara invited me to give a introduction on the Gospel of John. I think one really cool about the Gospel of John is, like, as an introduction, is to talk about the what we call the prologue, the first chapter of the Gospel of John. Um, it's one of my favorite parts of the whole of the New Testament, and it's full of little secrets, little messages there in that chapter that can really help us to understand the Gospel of John in general. Can help us understand who Jesus is and his plan of salvation for us, God's plan of salvation. Um, when you give an introduction about the gospel, you always can speak about, who wrote it, when the gospel was written. But all this information you can get if you read the introduction on your own Bible. So I invite you, also at one point, to read. Usually the Bibles, they have a good introductions. If you have the Bible of Jerusalem the Bible of Jerusalem has a very good introduction to this gospel, and it will give you all these technical information: who wrote the gospel, when was written, where, the division of the gospel. So I'll leave that work with you, and now I really want to talk about the first chapter. I think it will be more helpful for you all. So the gospel of John is divided in 4 parts. Okay. The first part is the prologue that we'll study now. The word prologue means the first words, the introduction, right? The first chapter. And then after the prologue, from chapter 2 to chapter 12, we have what we call the book of signs. In this book, Jesus will, to show that he was sent by the Father, show the glory of the Father in his person. He will show to the people who were around him 7 signs. That's why it's called the book of signs. For example, the very first sign he makes is the miracle in the wedding at Cana, making wine out of the water. So that was the first sign, and then later on he will do 7 signs, some healings, etc. And that's very important. Each one of those signs are very important, and they show a little bit who he is, and he presents the face of the Father to us. And that's very important for John. No one ever saw the Father, just the Son saw the Father. So Jesus, in his own life, he will present to us who God is all the time. So this sign is a way to show those 7 signs. So once he's done with the 7 signs, the very last sign is the resurrection of Lazarus. We'll get into a different book from chapter 13 to chapter 20, which is the book of glory. Is the hour of Jesus, right? Is the passion. Goes to the supper, pretty much to the resurrection. Okay. And then Jesus will show that also in his own passion, his own resurrection, the power and the glory of God, of his Father. And then once this is done by chapter 20, 21, then there is the end of the book, which is called the epilogue. which is like the last word, the words at the end. And then we'll see like Jesus meeting the apostles in Galilee. So pretty much this is the main structure of the Gospel of John. And then we have the first chapter. I'll talk a little bit about some like important points of this chapter, and it's pretty amazing. Like you can read that, and you might not notice so many details. The author of the gospel present to us. Someone who is acquainted with the Old Testament pick those up right away, like especially the book of Genesis. There are many references to the book of Genesis. And those are the main ones I want to talk to you. And it's really helpful. I don't know about you, but like I really like this Disney series, The Mandalorian. I love Star Wars and pop culture. And then yeah, good. I'm seeing other people sharing the same interest. So The Mandalorian, if you were a Star Wars fan and you watched The Mandalorian, like the whole time you were like, yeah, Baby Yoda, and so many references to the movies. If you saw the movies, the Star Wars movies, if you saw the cartoons, the Clone Wars, you see so many little references. But like if you saw it before, if you're really into it, I mean, if you don't know anything about Star Wars, you're like, what is going on? Like, actually, all the priests in my community, I'm a Legionary of Christ, the congregation of Legionary of Christ, and usually I watch this with Mandalorian with the other priests. they hate it. They don't get it. It's like, oh, what a weird series, man. And I'm excited about everything because I'm seeing the references, right, to the previous movies. And the Gospel of John is pretty much like that. There's so many little references. They're kind of hidden there, Easter eggs, if you might call it. They're like hidden there. If you are acquainted with the Genesis and the other books, you pick those, and everything makes much more sense. Is much more exciting. So let's start then talking about the first chapter. I can read it. Let's do this. I'll read the first 8. I'll read the first 18 chapters. The 18 verses from verse 1 to 18. So you can follow in your own Bible. I'm using the translation of the New American Bible here. And you can follow with your own translation. Let's go. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came to be through him, and without him nothing came to be. What came to be through him was life, and this life was the life of the human race. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. A man named John was sent from God. He came for testimony to testify to the light, so that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but came to testify the light. The true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. He was he was in the world, and the world came to be through him. But the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, but his own people did not accept him. But to those who did accept him, he gave power to become children of God, to those who believe in his name, who were born not by natural generation, not by human choice, nor by a man's decision, but of God. And the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. And we saw his glory, the glory as of the Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. John testified to him and cried out, saying, "This was he of whom I said, 'The one who is coming after me ranks ahead of me, because he existed before me.' From his fullness we have all received grace in place of grace. Because while the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, the only Son, God, who is at the Father's side, has revealed him." Great. So it's a beautiful, beautiful passage. Um, it's very providential to be speaking about it today, that it's the first Sunday of Advent, talking about like the Word who comes to the world. Because pretty much in these 19 verses, we have a summary of Advent. We have a summary of the plan of salvation. It's like, first of all, like, it's interesting to see the structure of those 19 verses. You start, like, it's what we call like concentric structure. Okay, what is a concentric? Like, I don't know if you ever saw a concentric circle. It's like a structure that has two ends. They're similar to each other. They mirror each other, and they are around the center, who is unique. Okay. So the sides, let's say, of this concentric structure, the bookends are like the first verse, the last verse, and they mirror each other. Okay. So the first verse talks about, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. If you see the last verse, verse 18, no one has ever seen God, the only Son, God, who is at the Father's side, has revealed him. So it's pretty amazing. Like, the first and the last verse, they mirror each other. You know, they are talking about the Father and the Son, who are with each other before the existence of all creation, and the ones who know each other, they are only them. Okay. Jesus is the only one who is with the Father and knows the Father. And at the center of this structure, we have the incarnation. So the Son of the Father, who was with him from all eternity, comes into the world. And that's why in the middle of this concentric structure, you have those verses. The true light which enlightened, the verse 9 to 11. Everyone was coming to the world. He was in the world, and the world came to be through him, but the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, but his own people did not accept him. So at the center of this passage of the prologue is the incarnation. Okay. And the author develops that later on. So you have on the sides God, the Son with the Father, and the center, the incarnation. And then if we go to the first verse, another interesting thing we'll see is how the author used the verb to be. And the beginning was the word. Of course, he used that in Greek, but the translation, we will translate that to English, and the verb was, in the past. So the meaning of that first verse, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, is to show that, like, with the verb was, that Jesus existed before all creation. He pre-exists everything. In a way, he self-existent. He was with God, and kind of his existence doesn't depend on anything else. And that's why the author of the gospel, John, uses uh, talks about Jesus, and later on he will reveal who is the Word, but he used first of all the word, right? Um, which in Greek originally is logos, the word logos. Maybe you heard this word before. There's a pretty important word in Greek. It meant many things. It meant reason. It meant actually meaning itself. It meant wisdom. Uh, so in has a very important meaning also in the Bible itself. In the Old Testament, this word appears a lot, especially in the book of wisdom, the book of Proverbs. It means like the divine wisdom, the wisdom of God Himself. Um, the book of wisdom talks about the logos, about the word, with God as His own wisdom that creates the whole world. So here you see a very important connection to the Old Testament. So a Jew in the time of, or like a Gentile for that matter, would read this and would right away, like in the first very line, talking about logos, they will realize we're talking about God, about something divine. We're talking about meaning of the entire universe. We are talking about creation here. What is the force and the drive and the reason behind our creation? And together with that, the first words in this gospel also help us to think about the creation and the book of Genesis, the very first book of the Bible, as we have that now in the canon. The very first verses in this gospel, in the beginning was the Word. They mirror the very first words of the book of Genesis. Here I don't know if you have the Genesis with you. I'll read just the first verse. In the beginning, God created heavens and earth. In the beginning. As a matter of fact, I mean, the book of Genesis. Genesis is a Greek word that means beginning, right? The genesis of something is the origin, the beginning of something. It comes from Greek. It's a translation from Hebrew of those first words in the beginning. So like also a Jew who would read these first verses right away would think about the book of Genesis, right? Like a Star Wars fan who watches Mandalorian right away, like, okay, he's talking about the Jedi, or why not, or X-Wings, etc. Here also we can think about Genesis right away. But that's not just it. There's other very important clues, hints that made us think about the book of Genesis. For example, the reference to creation, all things came to be through him, and without him, nothing came to be. Then life, God in the book of Genesis, in the first chapter, is giving life for creatures. Then, very important, verse 5, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has now overcome it. And that also has a very important parallel. Verse 3 of the first chapter of Genesis, and God said, let there be light, and there was light, and God saw the light was good, and God separated the light from darkness. One of the very first creations of God is the creation of light. So here too, the fourth gospel is talking to us that through the word, through the logos that was with the Father, we receive life and light. and the light overcomes darkness. So another interesting thing to notice is the movement. In these 18 verses, there is a very strong dynamic, a very strong movement, which we call like the movement of descension and ascension. Okay. So at the very beginning, we see the word, the logos with God, okay, eternally with God, pre-existent, in a way above and beyond everything else in the universe. He existed previous to creation, and he assisted when he was with God in the creation of the universe. And little by little, we'll see that the logos will descend, okay, will descend into creation, to the universe. And then this descension first starts with the creation itself, the light, the life, and the truth who comes from the word, from the logos. And the logos will come into the world. And finally, like the logos will become flesh itself, which is, let's say, the climax, the most important, the summit of this passage. The word, the verse 14, the word became flesh and made his dwelling among us, and we saw his glory, the glory of the Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. So in a way, becoming flesh is the bottom of this descension, is the bottom of the abyss. So from eternity with God, the logos comes and becomes flesh among us. Okay, and after that, what we'll see is the continuation of this movement, is an ascension. So the logos descends, incarnates, become flesh, and now the logos will ascend towards God again. Okay, and then we see how he was the glory. All those references to glory, there's several of them. He saw the glory of the Father. He's the only Son. He's full of grace and truth. We see the testimony of John. He received all grace, grace upon grace. No one ever saw the Son, the God, but the only Son who is at the Father's side has revealed him. So that's the summit, like he was at the side. So there is this whole descension and then ascension to the Father. And that's very important, okay? In a way, that's the plan of salvation. God sent his own Son, and he has a descension. He totally surrenders himself to mankind, to us, die on the cross, and with the resurrection, he goes back to the Father, okay? And with him, he brings us, okay? All those who believe, all those who are baptized, he brings us with us, because he himself now is a man, and he brings humanity and human nature to the Father. And here's like in these 19 verses, we have like a summary of the whole Bible and the whole history of salvation. Another thing about verse 14, and like what I told you was the bottom line of the descension. And the word became flesh and made his dwelling among us, and we saw his glory. Also, like a Jew right away would pick here the book of Exodus, okay, and how God was with the people of Israel in the desert, with them, okay, present as a column of fire during the night and clouds during the day, present in the tent, present in the Ark of the Covenant later on. And that's very important. Actually, when the original Greek of verse 14, when he said it became flesh, he uses a word in Greek that means to dwell, to pitch a tent. And in that phrase, to pitch a tent, to dwell, to become flesh, it's very similar. It has the same consonants of a very important word in the Old Testament, which is Shekinah. The word Shekinah in Hebrew means the presence of God. It's a word they extensively used in Exodus and especially in the Pentateuch, but also in the other books and the Wisdom, etc., to speak about the presence and the glory of God, Shekinah. The same word in Greek has a word that sounds pretty much the same, very similar, which is used here, and the word became flesh. This become flesh, this dwelling among us, is this word. Okay, so the intention here is to show us like Jesus is the presence, the Logos is the presence, the Shekinah, the glory of God among us. Okay. And that's very important. Like when I read the Gospel of John, I don't know if you ever saw people who say, well, usually they're not Christians, sometimes they are, and that's sad. People say, whoa, I really admire Jesus. He's really like a great master, a great professor, a rabbi, or like Jesus is a prophet, whatever. In a way he is, but he's much more than that. John is telling us that Jesus is God. He's telling us that he's the presence of God. And as a matter of fact, throughout the Gospel of John, Jesus himself will call him God. There are several moments in the Gospel of John where Jesus will say the word I am, esti, esmi, in Greek. And that word means, I am, means Yahweh in Hebrew. I am the one who is, the name of God that God revealed in chapter 3 of Exodus to Moses in the burning bush. Jesus throughout the gospel uses that. For example, when he's about to be captured, I think chapter 18, in his passion, he's in Gethsemane praying, and he's about to be captured, and they ask, who is the soldiers ask for Jesus, and he say, I am. The word by itself means Yahweh. And because he uses this word in other moments too, we know he's identifying himself with Yahweh, with the divine presence, with the divine name. So like Jesus is not just a professor, just not a pastor. He is God. I mean, if he's not God, he's a totally crazy person or like a liar. There is no like middle ground here, right? Okay, so I talked to you about the movement, the structure, the dwelt among us. And then as a continuation of those 19 verses, there's something very interesting. Beginning on verse 19 and later in verse 29, which is another sign of creation. Right on verse 29, it says, the next day he saw Jesus coming toward him and said, behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. So John gives his testimony about Jesus, and on verse 29, the gospel says, in the next day he saw Jesus again, John, and he said, behold the Lamb of God. So there are two important things here. The first one, beginning on verse 29, there is a reference to the 7 days of creation. Okay, so the author of the gospel will introduce little scenes, little passages using in the next day, in the next day, in the next day, and then later on he'll say in the third day. And then if you add those days together, you have the number 7 days, okay, which is a reference to the 7 days of creation. And the seventh day, you finish at the wedding at Cana. Okay, some people, some theologians say actually that's the 6th day. The way they count is different. There's 2 ways of counting it, but it could be both the 6th and the 7th day. The important thing there is that it's a reference also to the creation and to show that Jesus, as the Word of God, who exists previously, as we saw before all universe, he's doing a new creation now in the world. As he incarnates and he becomes man and he starts his mission, he's doing a totally new creation. That's why the 7 days coincide with the beginning of his ministry. Okay, he's meeting John Baptist, he's meeting the apostles, calling them, starting his ministry, and doing a new creation. Okay, that's very important. And the 7th or 6th days being the wedding at Cana is very important too, because at the summit of creation, the 6th day, at the end of the 6th day, you have the wedding of Adam and Eve. Okay. In a way here, in this wedding, we don't know the names of the couple. The only names that the wedding of Cana in chapter 2 we know is Jesus and Mary. In a way to show that, for John, that's very important to show us that Jesus is the new Adam and Eve is, and Mary is the new Eve in a way. And we'll see that again in the cross, at the foot of the cross, Mary and Jesus. And then in the resurrection, when Mary Magdalene, and here we don't have Eve anymore, but like Mary Magdalene, when she meets Jesus, the first thing in I think chapter 20, she thinks that Jesus is the gardener, which is also a reference to Adam as the gardener of the Garden of Eve, or Eden. Okay, so it's very important for John to show us that Jesus is the new Adam. That's very important. Okay. And then after the wedding with the first signs, and then we have the first book of signs, and the first sign, and the whole book of signs will develop out of that. Okay. So I think I should end now. I could say so many more things, but it's an introduction, so I hope you can yourselves read the book and the Gospel of John by yourselves, and I think you'll be able to take a lot out of that. Thank you.